Hello, this is R.J. Deacon reading the Supreme Court of the United States opinion syllabus in Terry v. United States. Certiorari to the United States Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit. Argued May 4th, 2021. Decided June 14th, 2021. If you'd like to support the podcast, please stay tuned to the end of the podcast. Petitioner Tarahirik Terry contends that he is eligible to receive a sentence reduction for his 2008 crack cocaine conviction. In 1986, Congress established mandatory minimum penalties for certain drug offenses. That legislation defined 3 relevant penalties for possession with intent to distribute cocaine. The first 2 carried mandatory minimum sentences based on drug quantity, a 5-year mandatory minimum triggered by either 5 grams of crack cocaine or 500 grams of powder cocaine, and a 10-year mandatory minimum triggered by either 50 grams of crack or 5 kilograms of powder. The third penalty differed from the first 2. It did not carry a mandatory minimum sentence, did not treat crack cocaine and powder cocaine offenses differently, and did not depend on drug quantity. Petitioner was subjected to this third penalty when he pleaded guilty in 2008 to possession with intent to distribute an unspecified amount of crack. The district court determined that his offense involved about 4 grams of crack. 2 years later, Congress passed the Fair Sentencing Act of 2010, which increased the crack quantity thresholds from 5 grams to 28 for the 5-year mandatory minimum and from 50 grams to 280 for the 10-year mandatory minimum. But Congress did not make this change retroactive until 2018, when it enacted the First Step Act. After that, petitioner sought resentencing on the grounds that he was convicted of a crack offense modified by the Fair Sentencing Act. The district court denied his motion, and the 11th Circuit affirmed. Supreme Court held decision is affirmed, and Justice Thomas delivered the opinion. A crack offender is eligible for a sentence reduction under the First Step Act only if convicted of a crack offense that triggered a mandatory minimum sentence. The First Step Act makes an offender eligible for a sentence reduction only if the offender previously received a sentence for a covered offense. That's Section 404B. The Act defines covered offense as a violation of a federal criminal statute, the statutory penalties for which were modified by certain provisions in the Fair Sentencing Act. Section 404A. The Fair Sentencing Act modified the statutory penalties for offenses that triggered mandatory minimum penalties because a person charged with the same conduct today no longer would face the same statutory penalties that they would have faced before 2010. For example, a person charged with knowing or intentional possession with intent to distribute at least 50 grams of crack was subject to a 10-year mandatory minimum before 2010. Now he would be subject to only a 5-year mandatory minimum. But the Fair Sentencing Act did not modify the statutory penalties for petitioner's offense. Before 2010, a person charged with petitioner's offense, knowing or intentional possession with intent to distribute an unspecified amount of Schedule I or II drug, was subject to statutory penalties of imprisonment of 0 to 20 years, and up to a $1 million fine, or both, and a period of supervised release. After 2010, a person charged with the conduct is subject to the exact same statutory penalties. Petitioner, thus, is not eligible for a sentence reduction. The decision below is affirmed. Justice Thomas delivered the opinion of the court, in which Chief Justice Roberts and Justices Breyer, Alito, Kagan, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett joined. Justice Sotomayor filed an opinion concurring in part and concurring in the judgment. Thank you for listening. If you'd like to support the podcast, find the PayPal note in the show link. Find the PayPal link in the show notes and Patreon link on I'm going to have to cut this. You know what? Or people will laugh if I post it the other way, and then they'll actually bother to go to my PayPal note, which is in the show notes. There it is again, PayPal link, which is in the show notes. Or find me on Patreon, or contact me at roadscholar80@gmail.com. And hopefully the little laugh encourages you to actually bother supporting.